Okay, I'm live here with Assimilate Python from zero. This is day one. And the idea here is that I'm going to take my time, I'm not in a hurry, and I'm going to go from the ground zero and each week cover something about Python and incrementally go through a very comprehensive amount of Python programming. So within, let's say, a year, that's 52 lessons. That's pretty substantial over a couple of years. And it's 2 years of Python. People could watch this and become experts on the language. And I'm going to assume people have absolutely zero knowledge of it. So that's why it's called Assimilate Python from zero. And I'm also going to put this up onto the O'Reilly platform as well and put this into a series. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Let's say you're new to Python, you don't know what to do to get started. I think a good place to start would be to talk about where you can run Python without even needing to install it. I think one of the biggest issues with Python for a newcomer is that someone tells them bad advice, which is they're an expert at programming and they tell you, hey, you need to use this editing tool and get this installed. And then after like 5 days of trying to mess around on their computer, they just give up. The reality is you don't even need to install anything on your computer, on any computer, to run Python. In fact, I've got 25 years, maybe closer, roughly like that on Python. And I don't even use my computer much with Python. I do a little bit, but mostly I just use a web browser. So that's the good news. So let's go through some of the things that we should care about to start with. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we can go here. And I'm going to start out with the idea of first the concept of GitHub. So if you're not familiar with GitHub, it's the most popular place that people are storing examples and software projects. And so if you are new to programming, it is a good idea to use GitHub and just create a free account. And I'll show you a good example of one of the reasons, or one of the easy ways to get started with GitHub, even if you're not an expert, you know nothing about it, is first, once you've logged in, you've created an account here, and you can create a new repository. And a repository is basically like a Dropbox. Essentially, you put all your code inside of here. And let's go ahead and take a look at here. We'll call this Assimilate Python from zero. So this is going to be a repo that I'm probably going to update over a couple years. And this will be a from zero introduction to Python. There we go. And notice I can make it public. That means that anyone can see it. I think for most people starting out, I would assume everything you do should be public so that you don't get caught up into thinking something you're doing is secure, because there's a lot of issues that you can go into in putting private keys into repos. But if you go ahead and create a public repo, you can add a Readme. And this is really important. I would say every project should have a Readme. And then we can add a git ignore. This is also very important for a Python project. So you don't put in like garbage files, and you can put in a license if you want to put a license. So once I've done this, again, this is something I would recommend all beginners to Python know how to do, is that you don't really need anything to get to work. So a couple things to start off with is that if you just click this button in GitHub right here, you can actually put notes in here. So I think this is a good way to get started, right, is add notes. And so we can say, day one, right? And if you do 2 hashes, it's a subheading underneath this, and you can even preview it, right? You can see what it would look like. Oh, there we go. There's my day one, right? So you can actually do everything inside of the web browser, inside of GitHub. And so we'll say the first lesson that I want to talk about is like running Python. Like where do we actually run it? And to start with, one of the things you can do is GitHub itself has a a service called GitHub Codespaces. And so Codespaces allows you to run Python inside of the web browser, and conveniently it links in with your repo. So I would say this is, if you do want to sign up for an account with GitHub Codespaces, I don't know what it costs, like $10 a month, or you can get it for free for education. This might be the simplest way to run Python. I would much recommend it over using an environment like your computer. If we go to here and we go to this icon down here, manage, I can actually change the theme and put this to get some kind of dark theme. Just pick whatever one you want. I'm going to go ahead and pick the Visual Studio Dark. I like a darker theme. And notice it comes up with all this stuff. Get all this stuff going. Well, we don't have to do anything. Basically, out of the box, it's kind of ready to go here. And now, how would I use Python? This is the nice first question here is I would just type in the word Python. That's it. And this launches the Python interpreter. So we can even put this inside of our Readme. If we click on the Readme, say, how do we do it? Well, option 1, right? We could say, create a GitHub repo, and launch GitHub Codespaces. Then type Python. So that's the easy thing to do. And from here, I would just type in import, and this would do, or let's not even do import, let's just do print hello. This is the classic thing people do, is they just put a print statement, and we can see I can basically tell it a command, and it'll give me back the feedback. Now, if I want to set a variable, and I say x is equal to 1, if I want to print that variable, I can also print that variable. So these are probably the first two things that I would recommend playing around with, is launch an interpreter somewhere, set a variable, print it out. Right? Those are kind of the basics here. Now, there's another way that we can also run Python. If you do exit, that'll exit it out. Another way we can run Python is through using a script itself. And so we can say option 2, the Python will say this launches the interpreter, this launches the interpreter. And 2, my spelling is awful. So interpreter, did I misspell that? Yeah, I knew I misspelled it. Let's just go through here. Without spell check, I'm helpless. Option 2 would be that you could also find another location to launch Python. And I would say Google Colab is also a really good environment to run Python. So what do? Well, we can also go back here, type in Colab, and you can see it says, welcome to Colab. This is another free environment. And what we can do is we can just say new notebook. And there's a pro account if you want to do like deep learning and things like that. But for now, we just want to create a new notebook. And what we can do is we can call this day 1. Needs a file name. You can also think of it like a Google Doc or something. Day one Python. And so what would you want to know about this kind of environment? So a notebook is kind of like interpreter, but it's a slight variation. It's got code, it's got text. If you go here, it shows you a table of contents, which shows up if you do text. You can search. You can also go through here and look at variables. You can also look at the file system as well if you're going to save data to the file system. So there's some good things over here. But in general, to start with, you can do the same thing. You can just say, print hello world and print out your Python code here. If you want to do a variable, again, x is equal to 1, and you can say, go ahead and print this. Now, this has some advantages over the classic Python interpreter because of the fact that you actually get the saved copy of it. Now, if I go through here and I want to save it, which is important when you're getting started, I think it's really important to get notes, is go to File and say Save a Copy in GitHub. And if I go to that location, notice it's going to go ahead and make a link to my repo, and I can actually just find the repository that I created and I'll sync it in. So this, I think, is a really good tool as well, and it's free, so you don't even have to sign up for an account. And so here we go, Assimilate Python from zero. That's the repo I want. I'm going to go ahead and say OK. It'll just check it in for me, right? So this is neat. Now, if somebody else wants to open it back up, there it opens it directly back up again. So it's a really cool tool here. And if I want to hop back into my other environment here, if I do a command called git pull, which basically grabs the latest changes, we can even see that notebook. And if I select it here, I can even run it, right? So I can say print hello world right here, and I can go through and run the same notebook inside of here. So I would say these are two of the most useful ways to run Python interpreter is GitHub Codespaces or Colab. There's a third way as well, which would be you could use SageMaker Studio Lab, which is another tool that could be good to play around with. But since we have a couple tools here, I think this is probably good enough. So now that we know how to basically run things, what's the next thing that you should care about with Python? Well, I think one thing to think about would be to just follow the official documentation and maybe step by step create examples. And so let's go to the official documentation and let's find it. We go to python.org. Here we go, Python. Here we go, here's Python website. We go to the documentation. We go to Python docs. So this is covering Python 3.10.6. So this is something to be aware of, is that Python is actually under pretty active development and it's constantly changing. And so one of the things that we may want to do is look at the version of Python here. There we go, Python 3.10. It's probably good enough for our needs. And we can put a link to this documentation inside of our repo. We could say like, official Python tutorial, official Python documentation. I think this is a really good resource to have handy. I mean, there's tons of resources all over the internet, but I mean, ultimately, the people that wrote it are going to be good, right? So let's follow their official tutorial here so we can see Python is an easy-to-use language, whetting your appetite. So it's just, that's an intro. Now, the next thing is using interpreter. So we just went through this. The Python interpreter is usually in your operating system. Because we're using a Linux environment, we can actually find this out. So if we say which Python, right, so we can say which Python, it'll tell us where Python is. Now let's even put that. Let's just say like get running Python, like, question, how do I find which version of Python? Here we go. Well, we just do this. We just say which Python. What this will do is prints path to Python. So we can see in this environment that this is actually the Python that I'm using. If I want to find the Python version, I just do Python, I do Python, I think is it dash version? The Python version. You do this, you do Python version. So same thing, we say Q, how do I find the Python version? Answer, we do this. So we got those out of the way. And interactive mode, we covered that. And if you wanted to write a script, you would put this at the top of your script. Okay, we got those out of the way. Let's go to informal introduction would be to think about using Python as a calculator. I think this is really good advice because most people have familiarity with Python. And so this would be a good, I think a very good example. So let's go ahead and link to this, and we'll say, okay, let's just say getting started with Python, playing around with Python. Getting started, use Python as calculator. I think this is very good advice because it demystifies a lot of the things that are new to programmers, and we can say Python as calculator. So I don't even necessarily need to follow their tutorial because I know enough Python to do this. So what we can do is I can go back. Well, first I'll just I'll go back to my notebook here. And what's nice about these kinds of environments is that one, it's easy to demonstrate new concepts, and then two, I can check it back into my repository. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a text cell here, and I'm going to move it up, and I'm going to say, day one learning Python. There we go. And then underneath here, I'll have another cell. This will be 3. And we'll say, hello world. So this is kind of every programming language is what you're supposed to do. If I go to here, look, we have a table of contents. Now, I'm going to delete this one, and I'm going to add another section right here. We'll do hello world, and I'll say calculator. But for newbies, I think this is pretty important. Is to save your work here. Actually, we don't, was that 2? Or was that 3? Huh, it should be under the same, yeah, there we go, it should be under the same section. So what are the things that you can do with a calculator? Well, we can add, right? So we can say add, and we just say 2 plus 2, right? So you don't have to do anything. You can immediately become a Python programmer by just doing what you do in a calculator. What if I want to multiply? Let's go ahead and do that. Multiply. Add. Multiply. We can do 2 times 2. Pretty easy. You just say 2 asterisk 2 like that. So asterisk would be multiply. What if I want to do an exponent? Well, we can do that. So exponents. Oh, that's so bad. I always have to just Google stuff. Of course I misspelled it. There we go. Exponent. And we'll do 2 times 2. 2. For 2, we do double. So to do a power, this is 2 to the power of 2. You would do 2 asterisks. There you go, exponent. And then if you want to subtract, it's intuitive. Subtract would be similar, right? We don't need to go through all of the different things. Subtract. Subtract. There we go. And we can say 2 minus 2 is 0. So that's enough of a calculator. And you can see here all the different things you can do. Now, probably the next thing would be strings, right, in Python. And this is not bad as well. So if we want to go back to this notebook, we can just add a section called strings. So go here, we'll say 1, 2, 3 strings. And strings are basically a way of printing things out. And so if we wanted to create a basic string, one of them is hello. right? That's a string. Now, if I want to assign it to a variable, we'll call this, my hello. This, that's in a variable, and then I can print out that string like this. It would be the print statement. Now, how do I know it's a string? Well, Python, I can type in type my hello. Type my hello. So this is something that's pretty important to be aware of, especially as you're getting an understanding of Python, is that the print is something you should use all the time to just kind of get a feel for what's happening in the language. And the second is type, so that you understand, what it is you're actually doing. So in this case, I can see, it's a string, right? And so in general, what is the most important thing you probably need to know about a string and printing from a high level would be how to make a statement. That's probably the classic thing that you'd want to do. So let's say that you wanted to write some kind of a program in Python that used some kind of a print, which is common for people who want to do. We could say like today is equal to Tuesday, and we could say month is equal to August. We could say year is equal to 2022. So we have all those variables, and they're strings, and this is a number. So what if I wanted to print all those out and combine them together? Pretty straightforward in Python. What you do is use something called an F string, and you just put the letter F right there, and you would say, this is today's date, or today's date. Or today, we'll just say this is better. We'll say today is, and we do this, and I can just substitute each one of those by using these parentheses right here. And so if I would just say the same thing, I would say today is Tuesday, August 2022, just like that. And today is, there we go. And if I print that out, today is Tuesday, August 2022. There you go. So that's probably in a nutshell, what's important to know is that using F string syntax here to take a variable and substitute it. A string isn't necessarily anything magical. There are some cool things you can do with strings. We don't need to get into all of those things yet, but this kind of stuff is a great way to play around with Python. I would say the numbers and the strings and playing around with Colab, Notebook, and or GitHub Codespace, those are right there. You could spend a couple weeks just really getting kind of a fun experience with Python. So now that I've got all that material, I'm going to save this, and I'm going to, again, make a copy in GitHub. There we go. Let's scroll down to Assimilate on Python from 0. We'll save it. Now if I go back to my environment here, we can do a git pull, which again is just telling my environment to get the latest changes from GitHub. And this environment, is it saying that there's a change? I don't think we care about that though. So we can just say git stash. We'll say git pull, and then we'll say git status. And I don't think we have anything, so we'll just say git commit -n, adding latest changes. And there's nothing. So we have no changes to push. So basically all of these things that we talked about today should be, actually, let's do this. Your branch is up to date. So I always forget about this with git stash. Git stash merge. So what do we do? So we got a change here. And it's been so long since I used git stash. Let's try that. Let's merge it. One liner. Always scary, but let's see what happens. Patch does not apply. Well, those changes aren't that important for right now. I can fix those out later. But the main thing in a nutshell is how to actually run Python. We got the basics out of the way, and next week I'm going to cover again, just kind of go through the basics here, and go through here and get into list next, and then get into control statements. So I'm going to try to follow the official Python guide. All right, so that is a good spot to stop here. Hopefully I'll see you next week, or you can watch on O'Reilly, and look forward to hearing any comments you have as well. So see you next week.